Name is Nora Callahan. The backyard smelled like charcoal and cheap wine, and my mother decided to end me in front of 30 people. She was standing on the deck steps, champagne flute raised, cheeks flushed from her third glass. My brother Kyle had just announced his engagement to his college girlfriend, and the whole yard erupted like it was the Super Bowl. Sparklers, someone popping a bottle, my aunt crying happy tears into a paper napkin. Mom waited for the noise to settle, the way she always did when she wanted maximum audience. "This family," she started, voice carrying across the patio, "has always known how to produce winners." She looked at Kyle, beaming. Then her eyes slid to me. "And every winner needs someone to remind them how lucky they are. Some of us are here to cheer, some of us are just here." Laughter. Actual laughter. My cousin Tyler nearly choked on his beer. Kyle smiled into his drink. My father, standing by the grill with his spatula, steadied the ground like it owed him something. I held my glass steady. I smiled. "You're right, Mom. That's why I've been cheering from Denver for the past 4 years. Didn't even need a ticket. I set the glass on the railing, walked through the sliding door, and didn't go back outside. That was the last family party I attended. If someone you love has ever made you feel invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to be yours, leave it in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened after I walked through that door." I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a split-level house on Meridian Court, with aluminum siding that buckled every August and a basketball hoop in the driveway that only Kyle ever used. The neighborhood was the kind where everyone's dad worked somewhere with a union card and everyone's mom volunteered at the school carnival, and nobody talked about money except to say they didn't have enough of it. Kyle was 3 years older and 6 inches taller and could throw a football in a perfect spiral from the time he was 11. That was all it took. My father, who had washed out of a D3 soccer program at 20 and never quite recovered from it, saw my brother throw that ball once and decided the family had a destiny. From that point on, the calendar belonged to Kyle. Friday nights were his games, Saturdays were his travel team. Sundays were film sessions my father ran in the living room. Actual printed photos of plays spread across the coffee table while I sat at the kitchen counter doing homework to the sound of my dad narrating Kyle's future. My mother kept the scoreboard. She tracked his stats in a spiral notebook she kept on the kitchen counter next to the grocery list. She made his protein shakes in the morning and ironed his jersey the night before games. When he got a write-up in the Dayton Daily News his junior year, she laminated it and hung it in the hallway next to the family photos. My school photos were in a drawer. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because by the time I was 14, I had already stopped expecting anything different. When you grow up invisible, you either collapse into it or you build something underground where no one can take it from you. I chose the second one. My 7th grade science teacher, Mrs. Hartley, was the first adult who ever looked at me like I was the point of something. She had a room that smelled like formaldehyde and old textbooks, and she kept a shelf of broken electronics along the back wall. Donated junk from the district, mostly, stuff nobody wanted. Old calculators, a dissected VCR, a circuit board from a copier that had caught fire. One afternoon I stayed late helping her reorganize supply cabinets, and she caught me staring at the circuit board. "You can have it," she said, "if you can figure out what burned." I took it home in my backpack. Spent 2 weeks reading about circuit boards in the school library computer during lunch. Figured out it was a capacitor. Told her. She handed me another broken thing. That was how it started. Mrs. Hartley had a friend who ran a Saturday program at the public library, STEM workshops for middle schoolers, free admission, juice boxes included. She drove me herself the first time because she knew I'd never asked my parents for a ride. My mother was watching Kyle's playoff game. My father was filming it. The library program met in a back room with flickering fluorescents and folding tables that wobbled. There were maybe 10 of us, kids who didn't quite fit anywhere else. The instructor was a woman named Dr. Osei, who had just finished her PhD at Wright State and wore sneakers with everything and talked about engineering like it was a form of freedom. She was the second adult who ever looked at me like I was the point of something. I went every Saturday for 2 years. At home, I kept quiet about it. Not because I was ashamed, because attention in my house operated like a limited resource, and I had learned early that anything I claimed for myself would find a way to get redirected toward Kyle. When he needed new cleats, my birthday money went. When he needed a physical therapy copay, my school trip deposit went. My mother always framed it as family loyalty. We all support each other, she'd say. Which meant I supported Kyle, and Kyle accepted it as his due. My father was gentler about it, which somehow made it worse. He'd ruffle my hair when he passed me in the hallway. He'd ask about school in the vague way people ask about weather, not because they want to know, but because silence is uncomfortable. If I said something was hard, he'd say, "You'll figure it out," and drift back to whatever game was on. He meant it kindly. That's the part I kept having to remind myself. He meant it kindly, and it still left me completely alone. I applied to the Ohio State engineering program without telling anyone. I used the school counselor's office computer after hours because ours at home had parental controls my mother had never updated, but that my father theoretically monitored. Mrs. Hartley wrote my recommendation. Dr. O.C. wrote the other one. When the thick envelope arrived, I intercepted it from the mailbox before school. I told my parents at dinner that Thursday. Kyle was at practice. My father had his reading glasses on, half focused on the newspaper. My mother was reheating leftovers. Ohio State, I said. Engineering. Full merit scholarship. I applied in October. My father set down the paper. My mother turned from the stove. "You applied without asking us?" she said first. "The scholarship covers everything. Tuition, housing, books, meal plan." She turned fully around then. "Kyle's showcase is in April. We're going to need the car that whole month, Nora. Columbus is 2 hours away." "Mom, full scholarship. Your brother is about to get recruited. This family needs to be here for that. You can take classes at Sinclair, transfer later if you still want to." My father said nothing. He picked up the newspaper again, not reading it, just holding it between himself and the conversation. I excused myself. Went upstairs, sat on my bedroom floor with the acceptance packet spread across the carpet and decided that the decision was already made. She just didn't know it yet. The next 3 months were Cold War. My mother rescheduled my dentist appointment twice because Kyle had conflicts. She stopped including me in grocery runs she'd always brought me on. She made comments at dinner about gratitude and sacrifice and what it meant to be a team player, never looking at me directly when she said them. My father drove me to the DMV to update my license without being asked. He didn't say anything on the way there or back. When I thanked him, he said, "Sure thing," and turned on the radio. 2 weeks before move-in day, I was packing boxes in my room when my mother appeared in the doorway. "You do this," she said. "You're on your own. No calling home every time something goes wrong. No expecting us to drop everything." I kept folding clothes. "I know. Kyle's going to need support this year. Real support. From family." I zipped the duffel bag. "I hope he gets it." She stood there for another moment. Then she left. Move-in day was a Tuesday in late August. Mrs. Immis Hartley showed up at 7 in the morning in her hatchback. Dr. Osei met us in the parking garage at campus with a cart she'd borrowed from her department. We carried boxes up to the 7th floor of the residence hall and sat at my desk and made the bed and ordered pizza from a place across the street, eating it on the floor because I didn't have chairs yet. When they left, I sat in the empty room and felt something I didn't have a word for until later. It was relief that felt like grief, or grief that felt like relief. I'm still not entirely sure which. My mother texted once that evening. Kyle threw for 280 yards in the scrimmage. Big night. I read it and put the phone face down and went to sleep. Columbus in September smells like cut grass and dining hall food and the particular optimism of people who believe they are exactly where they're supposed to be. I was one of them, which surprised me. The scholarship covered my housing, but the stipend for personal expenses was thin. I picked up shifts at the campus coffee shop 3 mornings a week, 4:30 to 8, before my 8 o'clock lecture. The tips were inconsistent, but the free shift drinks kept me functional. On weekends, I worked data entry for an administrative office in the engineering building. $12 an hour, flexible hours, warm in winter. I budgeted in a spreadsheet every Sunday night. Groceries and transit passes and the occasional textbook I couldn't get from the library. It was tight. It was mine. My roommate was a civil engineering student named Becca from Toledo who kept a whiteboard calendar obsessively color-coded and played lo-fi music at a volume so low it felt like weather. We became friends the way you become friends with someone you live 4 feet away from, gradually, then completely. She knew about Kyle before the end of October. She didn't make a big deal out of it, which is exactly what I needed. My first semester was hard in the way good things are hard. Problem sets that took 4 hours and still came back wrong. Lab reports due every Friday, A professor in differential equations who graded like he was personally offended by partial credit. I failed my first midterm in that class with a 62 and sat in the stairwell outside the testing center for 20 minutes before I could make myself get up. I emailed Dr. Osei that night. She called me back in 10 minutes. 62 on the first midterm means you learned where the gaps are, she said. That's expensive information. Use it. I used it. Finished the semester with a B+. Not perfect. Good enough. Kyle got drafted. Not by an NFL team. By a semi-pro league in Indiana that my mother treated like the Super Bowl. She called to tell me on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Voice bright was something I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I realized after I hung up that she called to tell me not to ask how I was. The distinction felt important. I said congratulations. I meant it. I hung up and made ramen and read 40 pages of fluid mechanics and did not cry. I want to be honest about this part. There were nights in that first year when the loneliness had weight, not the dramatic gasping kind. The quiet kind. Watching other students go home for long weekends and knowing that going home meant sitting at a table where I'd be invisible again. Missing something I never actually had, which is a specific kind of grief nobody prepares you for. What got me through it was the work. Not as an escape, more like a compass. Every time I solved something that had been breaking me, I felt it. The proof that I was capable of more than anyone in that house had believed. Junior year, I joined a research lab studying materials failure in aerospace components. The professor who ran it, Dr. Seat Alvarez, had a reputation for being exacting and impatient, which turned out to mean she pushed everyone equally hard and expected you to own your mistakes. I thrived in that environment in a way I hadn't expected. She noticed. By second semester, she had me running my own sub-project, analyzing stress fracture patterns in turbine blade materials using scanning electron microscopy. I wrote my first academic paper that year. It got accepted to a regional conference. Dr. Alvarez came to watch me present it and stood in the back of the room with her arms crossed and nodded once when I finished. That nod was worth more to me than any trophy Kyle ever brought home. My lab partner was a third-year material science student named Joel, who brought exactly two things to every session: a thermos of terrible coffee and a systematic refusal to accept incomplete data. We drove each other insane for approximately 3 months before we became inseparable. He was the first person I told everything to, not the curated version, the whole thing. He listened, then he said, "Does your brother actually like football, or does he like that your parents like him liking football?" I'd never thought about it that way. I still think about it that way. Joel was there the night the email arrived from Meridian Aerospace, a Denver-based firm that had read my conference paper and wanted to talk about a fellowship position. I read it 3 times before I believed it. Joel read it once, stood up, and went to get actual good coffee from somewhere to celebrate. The fellowship paid a living wage, offered full benefits, and included a path to a permanent role if the work went well. I was 22. I had $37 in my checking account that week. I accepted before they finished the sentence. I told my mother on a Sunday call she had initiated, which was unusual. She wanted to know if I'd be home for Kyle's playoff game. His semi-pro league had a postseason, apparently. "I'm moving to Denver," I said. "Fellowship at Meridian Aerospace." "Fellowship at Meridian Aerospace, Materials Research." Silence. "Denver?" she repeated. "Colorado." "Yes." "Nora, Kyle's game is the 14th. "I know. I'll be in Denver on the 14th. Another silence. "This is very far. It's a great opportunity. You always do this." Her voice shifted, the specific shift I knew like a weather pattern. "You make everything about yourself. This family is in a critical year." "Mom, I worked for this." "Your brother is working too. We all make sacrifices." My father got on the line briefly. "Congratulations," he said. It was the most uncomplicated thing he'd ever said to me. I thanked him. He handed the phone back. I flew to Denver in May with 2 checked bags and the laptop I'd saved up for over 2 semesters of coffee tips and data entry. Mrs. Hartley sent me a card that arrived the week before I left. "Nora," it said. "I knew in 7th grade. Now go prove it." I packed it in my carry-on. Denver in early summer smells like altitude and pine, and the particular cleanness of air that hasn't been processed by a Midwest industrial corridor. I rented a studio apartment in the Baker neighborhood, 3rd floor of an old building with a fire escape I could open the window onto, radiator that clanged every morning at 6, neighbors who minded their own business. The fellowship was everything the email promised. Meridian worked on next-generation thermal barrier coatings for turbine components, keeping jet engines from destroying themselves at the temperatures they operated at. I worked under a senior engineer named Peter who had 20 years in the field and communicated primarily through post-it notes and raised eyebrows. He expected you to figure things out. I had been trained for that since 7th grade. I was good at the work. Not in a way I need to oversell. It was just a match. The kind where the thing you've been building in private turns out to be exactly the tool the job required. I published a second paper at the end of my fellowship year. Meridian converted my position to full-time. I got a raise that felt surreal the first time I saw the number, then immediately normal, then motivating. I built a life. It was quieter than I'd expected a life to be. Weekday mornings on the fire escape with coffee, long runs along the Cherry Creek Trail on Sundays. Joel visited twice from Columbus, both times eating everything in my refrigerator and sleeping on my couch and reminding me that chosen people travel to find you. Dr. O.C. and I emailed regularly. Mrs. Hartley sent Christmas cards. My mother called on holidays. The calls followed a pattern. Kyle's update, family news, mild complaint about something logistical, brief and slightly accusatory sign-off. I kept them short. Not unkind, just brief. There was nothing left to prove in those conversations, and I had stopped trying. My father emailed occasionally. Forward news articles about aerospace companies sometimes. I always wrote back 1 or 2 sentences. It was the most honest relationship we'd managed. 3 years into Denver, Kyle's semi-pro league folded. The team dissolved mid-season over ownership disputes and unpaid contracts. He moved back into my parents' house at 28 with a bad knee and a lot of opinions about what had gone wrong that seemed to start and end with everyone except himself. My mother called me that week. "Your brother's going through a hard time." "I'm sorry to hear that. He needs support, family support." I waited. "You're in a good position, Nora. You could help." "Help? How?" "He's looking at a coaching certification program. The good one is expensive." The number she named was 4 months of my rent. "I'm not going to do that," I said. "He's your brother. He is. And I hope he gets back on his feet. But I'm not funding it." She made a sound I recognized. The intake of breath that meant she was recalibrating how much disappointment to deploy. "I don't understand you sometimes." "I know," I said. "I've noticed." We said goodbye and I sat for a while at my kitchen table, watching the evening come in through the window. Then I made dinner and read and went to bed. 4 months later came the invitation, cream cardstock with gold foil. My mother's 60th birthday. Backyard party, catered this time. Kyle had apparently decided to help plan it, which meant he was doing better, which was good. I turned the envelope over twice. My name was printed neatly in a font she'd clearly had someone design. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I booked the ticket. Dayton in July's thick and flat and smells like cut grass and sprinkler water and the specific barbecue of people who take it seriously. The house on Meridian Court looked smaller, the way places always do when you've been living inside a bigger version of yourself. Fresh paint on the shutters. The basketball hoop gone, finally. Balloons tied to the mailbox that bobbed in the humid air. I parked down the street and walked up in linen trousers and a blazer, sunglasses on. Neighbors I half recognized. My Aunt Connie, who hugged me and said I looked thin. Kyle's fiancée Amber, who was gracious in a way that felt genuine. A collection of my parents' friends who called me the engineer, which is not a name but which I accepted. My father found me near the drink table. He'd gotten older in a way that surprised me. Not worse, just more clearly the person he'd always been underneath all the noise of his younger ambitions. He hugged me properly. "You came," he said. Like he'd half expected I wouldn't. Maybe I'd half expected that too. Kyle did the shoulder clap thing. "Denver treating you right?" "Yeah," I said. "It is. Heard you're doing big stuff. Aerospace or whatever." "Something like that." He nodded with a sincerity I didn't quite know what to do with. Maybe that was growth. Maybe I just couldn't tell anymore. My mother held court by the cake table, sundress and earrings, playing host in the precise way she always had, efficient warmth, full control of the atmosphere. She greeted me with a cheek kiss and "You look tired," and moved on to the next guest before I could respond. The party moved in the way these parties move. Speeches about what 60 means, toasts about the future, the specific controlled chaos of catered food running out in the wrong order. I stood at the edge of most of it, drinking sparkling water, watching. Then my mother climbed the deck steps with her champagne flute. "To the people who make a family," she said, and the yard went quiet. Kyle and Amber, this year, a new beginning. Cheers. She let them fade. And to all of you who have shown up, year after year, who have kept your roots here. Her eyes found me in the crowd. Some children make you proud every day. Others, a small practice pause, the kind she'd had my whole life. You just wish could find their way back to where they belong. Laughter, not everyone. But enough. I walked toward her. Slowly, calmly. The crowd shifted to let me through. "Mom." I kept my voice even, quiet enough that only the people nearby heard. "I found where I belong, that's the whole story. I hope you enjoy the party." I kissed her cheek, set my glass on the railing, walked through the crowd to the gate and out to the street. Kyle came after me, got to the gate before it closed. "Nora, come on, she's just..." "I know what she is," I said. It wasn't cruel. It was just true. I drove to the airport and ate a terrible sandwich in the terminal and watched a thunderstorm roll in over the runway, and felt clean in a way I hadn't in years. My mother called twice before boarding. I let it go to voicemail. On the plane, I opened my phone and listened to neither message before deleting both. I blocked the number at cruising altitude, somewhere over Missouri, watching the lights of small towns below disappear into clouds. Denver received me the way it always did, quietly, without fanfare. The city doesn't care about your family drama, which is exactly what I needed. I changed my emergency contact to Joel, updated my beneficiary designations with HR, a process that took 20 minutes and felt like closing a door I'd been leaving cracked for years. I texted Dr. Osei and Mrs. Hartley that I was back and fine. Mrs. Hartley sent back a row of small emojis. Dr. Osei said, "I figured you'd go. I figured you'd be okay." She was right on both counts. My father emailed 2 weeks later. "Your mother was upset. Kyle is doing better. Knee responding to treatment. Hope work is good." I wrote back, "Good to hear about the knee. Work is great." I meant it. Kyle left a voicemail a month after that, not asking for money this time, just talking, rambling, a little awkward, something about how Amber had told him he should call. He said I seemed different at the party. More settled. Said he thought maybe he understood why I'd left, even if he didn't get it for a long time. He didn't ask me to respond. I didn't, not right away. But I saved it. That felt like something. The project that changed everything started as a side problem nobody wanted to solve. Turbine blades and high-performance jet engines operate at temperatures that exceed the melting point of the metals they're made from. The only reason they survive is the thermal barrier coating, a ceramic layer thinner than a human hair that insulates the metal from its own operating environment. When that coating fails, it fails catastrophically. Planes get grounded. Inspections take weeks. Airlines lose money. More importantly, people don't get where they're going. The industry had been predicting coating failures the same way for 30 years. Visual inspection and scheduled replacement on fixed intervals. It worked well enough. It was also wasteful, conservative, and blind to the specific stress history of any individual component. I'd been thinking about this problem sideways for 2 years. The data was there, temperature cycling logs, vibration records, operational histories, but nobody had built a predictive model that could synthesize it in real time and give maintenance teams an actual failure probability per component, not per aircraft type. I started building it after hours. Used my own laptop at first, pulling public data sets in Meridian's internal logs with Peter's blessing. By the time I had a working prototype, Peter had cleared space for it in our quarterly review. By the time I presented it to the engineering leadership, it had reduced false positive groundings in our pilot program by 40%. They gave me a team. The team was 3 people, myself, a data scientist named Garrett who thought in graphs and spoke in approximations, and a software engineer named Yumi who could look at broken code the way Mrs. Hartley once looked at broken circuit boards, with specific, hungry curiosity. We worked well together in the way that happens when people have different skills and similar stubbornness. We named the system Celeste, coding reliability and early stress tracking. Not my choice of name. Garrett's. He said it sounded like something you could trust, and that's what we were building. Meridian patented the algorithm. My name was on the patent. I'm not sure I fully believed it was real until I held the document. 2 aviation clients licensed Crest in the first year, then 6 more. Then Meridian integrated it into their standard service contracts for airline maintenance programs. The revenue numbers were the kind that made quarterly presentations interesting. I got a promotion. Then another one. Then a title that took up 2 lines on a business card and made Joel laugh out loud when I texted him a photo. Peter retired. At his farewell lunch, he gave a short speech that was mostly post-it notes he'd saved from across the years. He included one from me, a note I'd left on his desk after the first See You Rest presentation. 3 words, "It's working, Peter." He'd saved it. He didn't say much about it, just held it up. I had to look at my plate for a second. The house came later. I wasn't looking for one exactly. I was running the Cherry Creek Trail one Saturday morning and saw an open house sign on a side street and went in because the door was open and I was sweaty and curious. It was a craftsman bungalow in the Whittier neighborhood, 1920s bones, original woodwork, a kitchen that had been updated once in 1987, and once more recently, a backyard with a mature cottonwood that filtered the afternoon light into something almost architectural. The asking price was significant. I made an offer the next day. I closed 30 days later. I moved in with boxes I labeled in Sharpie, the same laptop that had come from Denver in a carry-on bag, and a dining table I bought at an estate sale. Solid walnut, 8 feet long, seats 8 comfortably. I refinished it myself over a weekend. Orbital sander and 2 coats of oil finish, the wood grain coming up warm and clear under the light. Joel came out and helped me move it into the dining room. He ran his hand along the surface and said, "This is the upgrade," and I knew exactly what he meant. Garrett hosted the first dinner at the house, then Yumi. Then Dr. O.C. came out for a conference and stayed the weekend, and we cooked together on Saturday and talked for 6 hours at that table. Mrs. Penn Hartley drove out the following spring for her retirement trip and sat at the head of the table eating the roast chicken I'd made, and looked at me with the same expression she'd had when she gave me the circuit board, patient, certain. Like she was watching something she'd always known would happen. I hosted Thanksgiving. Garrett brought his partner in a pecan pie. Yumi made her mother's stuffing recipe and guarded the process with amusing ferocity. Joel flew in from Columbus, slept in the guest room, ate quantities that should not have been possible. Dr. O.C. came. Mrs. Hartley came. We filled 8 seats. No scoreboards. No assigned roles. No one keeping track of who had done the most or deserved the most or cost the most. Just people who had chosen each other, eating until we were honest about being full, laughing at things that only made sense because we'd earned the context together. My mother called mid-dinner. Unknown number. She'd gotten a new phone. I saw the area code, Dayton, and silenced it. It rang again. I excused myself to the kitchen, answered. "Travis needs a lawyer," she said. It took me a moment to place the name. A cousin I'd barely spoken to in a decade. "The family is putting together, Mom." I kept my voice low. "I'm having dinner. This is family, Nora. I know." I looked at the dining room through the kitchen doorway. Yumi and Garrett laughing at something Joel had said. Dr. O.C. refilling glasses. Mrs. Hartley cutting pie. I'm with my family right now. I ended the call. Powered off the phone. Went back to the table. Garrett raised an eyebrow. I shook my head once. We had pie. The announcement came at dessert. I stood with my water glass because I don't make toasts with alcohol, a quirk nobody has ever questioned. I wanted to tell all of you something, I said. The Hartley O.C. Foundation officially files next month. I'd named it after the 2 people who had found me when I was invisible. Full-ride scholarships for girls in Ohio pursuing STEM degrees, with priority for students from districts with limited program funding. First round, 5 recipients. Mrs. Hartley put her fork down very carefully and pressed her fingers to her mouth. Dr. Assay said nothing. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Joel said, "About time," which made everyone laugh, including me. The foundation launched in January. Applications came from 47 students. We funded 5. The first recipient was a girl from a small district in southeastern Ohio, first in her family to go to college, wanted to study biomedical engineering. I met her at orientation. She was nervous and quiet, and her eyes were alive with something I recognized from a long time ago. I handed her the check and said, Dr. Osei told me something once that I want to pass on. This is expensive information you're about to get. Use it. She laughed, a little confused. She'll understand later. Kyle called me on a regular Tuesday evening, no special occasion. His knee had healed enough for a coaching job with a youth football league in Dayton. He sounded like himself, but different, less performed somehow. More actual. We talked for an hour. About Dayton, about Amber, about what it was like to have a plan fall apart and have to build a new one from inside the wreckage. He didn't mention money. He didn't mention our mother. He asked what Denver was like in spring. The mountains are still white, I said, but it's warm enough to run outside. I've never been, he said. You could come. A pause. Yeah? He hasn't yet. But the invitation stands. My father sent me a long email in March, longer than any he'd ever written. He said he'd been thinking about the party, about the years before it, about the way a person can be so focused on one thing, they don't notice what else is in the room. He said he was sorry. Not as an explanation, just as a fact. He said he was proud of me, which he'd maybe never said out loud before, at least not in writing. I read it 3 times. Wrote back, "Thank you, Dad. That means something." I meant it. My mother and I have not spoken since that call on Thanksgiving. Her number stays blocked. I don't feel guilt about it the way I thought I would. Not because I'm cold about it, but because the guilt I would have carried once was really just fear dressed up as obligation. I was afraid that cutting the line meant I had no tether. What I found was that the tether was never the thing keeping me up. The people at the table were. On a Sunday morning in April, I sat on my back step with coffee, the cottonwood dropping its first seeds, white and weightless, drifting across the yard. This rest system was in its 4th year. The foundation had funded 11 students. The Walnut Table had hosted more dinners than I'd counted, 900 miles from Dayton. 0 debt, 1 key I'd made for myself. I thought about that girl in the library room in 7th grade, the one who kept her Saturday mornings secret and hid her circuit boards in her backpack and built things in the dark because the light wasn't offered. I thought about everything she was building toward without knowing it. I thought she would like this porch, she would like this coffee, she would like these people. Real family is the table you build, the doors you leave open, the people who show up without keeping score. I'm still building. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes for a life to turn out the way mine did. Not the resume version, the real version. And what I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to me was magic. It was just cause and effect, playing out slowly enough that most people don't recognize it while it's happening. My mother poured every resource this family had into Kyle. That was a choice. And the consequence of that choice wasn't just that Kyle got the cleats and the attention and the laminated newspaper clipping. It was that I was left alone with myself at a very young age. And solitude, when you're young and hungry and have nowhere else to put your energy, can become either the thing that breaks you or the thing that builds you. I didn't have a lot of options, so I built. That's not a moral. That's just what happened. What I want to say about Mrs. Hartley and Dr. Osei is that they didn't save me. I want to be careful about that framing because it lets everyone else off the hook too easily. What they did was notice me at a moment when being noticed was the most important thing in the world, and then they gave me a direction. The work was mine. The showing up at the library every Saturday, the failed midterms, the coffee shifts at 4:30 in the morning, the years of building something in a field nobody in my family understood. That was mine. They handed me a door. I walked through it myself. I think about the people who don't get that door, who are just as capable, just as hungry, just as invisible, and who never cross paths with a Mrs. Hartley. That's the thing that kept me up at night until I did something about it. Not my mother's toast at a birthday party. Not Kyle's bad knee or his minor league contract that evaporated. Those things are just consequences of choices that were never mine to make. What kept me up was the question of whether I was going to be the kind of person who only ever built things for herself. The foundation was the answer to that question. The first girl we funded, quiet Southeastern Ohio, biomedical engineering, reminded me so specifically of who I was at 17 that I had to work to hold it together when I handed her the check. She doesn't know yet what she's capable of. She's about to spend the next 4 years finding out. That's the part that matters. Not the check. The finding out. My dad's email sits in a folder I go back to sometimes. He said he was proud of me. He also said he was sorry, which took him 60-something years. And I'm not going to pretend that doesn't sting a little. But I wrote back. Because intelligence without generosity is just cleverness, and cleverness alone doesn't build anything that lasts. My mother's number is still blocked. That's not cruelty, that's just an honest accounting of what that relationship costs versus what it returns. I made a choice. I'll own the consequences of it the way I've owned every other consequence in the story. What I know is this. The people around that walnut table on Thanksgiving, Garrett, Yumi, Joel, Dr. Osi, Mrs. Hartley, none of them are there by accident. They're there because, over 20 years, I made decisions that kept moving toward the life I wanted instead of the one I was handed. Small decisions mostly. Show up on Saturday. Stay late. Send the email. Accept the help. Build the thing. 900 miles from Dayton. No debt. One table I refinished myself. That's the whole story.